Well, thank you, Christy. And we'll shift gears here into the weather. And I'm getting a couple things. We'll do our normal outlook and an overview, and talk a little bit about El Nino here at the end today as we look into the fall and beyond. For the week prior, it was, as most people know and appreciate, we've had a little bit more of a taste of late summer here recently. But for the previous week, on the left-hand side here, you can see that most of the state was cooler than normal by a few degrees, especially last week, and especially in southern parts of the state, departures in some cases more than 4 degrees Fahrenheit below normal. One of the big developments, though, and we've talked about this for the last couple of weeks, the expectation for a warmer and drier than normal pattern developing, and that's what has happened, and it is happening, and is likely to continue here for the next couple of weeks. But it was for much of the state a dry week. As on the right-hand side here, a couple spots picked up a half an inch down in the southwestern lower, northeastern lower, but the vast majority less than, well, certainly less than a quarter, most cases less than a tenth, and some areas remain dry for the whole week. And so that, again, I think is a sign here of where we are right now and where we're likely to be over the next, at least next couple of weeks. If we look here at the season, especially given the recent cooler than normal weather, and that really goes back into August. And in looking at our degree day totals here on the left-hand side here, you can see the usual north to south gradient of degree day accumulations across the state. But what matters, of course, now, and in many cases, in some cases anyway, our crops are lagging a little bit behind where they typically are. Well, some of this certainly is related to the cooler than normal temperatures. Some, as we've talked about before, is also linked with the early season dryness and drought conditions that we had in many parts of the state. But you can see on the right-hand side here, though, our departures. These are seasonal base 50 growing degree days from the beginning of May through the present. And you can see in northern and eastern parts of the state, much as 200 units behind normal. So what was a relatively small departure from normal here a few weeks ago has really grown a little bit over time, and now is that's a significant departure from typically where we are for the third week in June. Again, lack of thermal time there. But note also at the same time, in far western portions of the state, and across western upper and western lower, there are a couple spots that are pretty close to where climatology says they should be, but most of the state, again, lagging behind. In terms of our one of the positive bits of news here, we have been delayed, at least in terms of our first freezing temperatures of the fall. This is a map showing where, at least with the observation sites that we have available, where have we seen freezing temperatures, and it's been really limited to far northern and interior portions of both upper and northern lower Michigan. But most of the state is behind now, typically what the climatology would suggest for this, especially in the northern part of the state. And you can see for the rest of the Midwest, it's really only far northern areas that have seen. This is 32 degrees or lower, by the way. If we ran this for a first killing freeze of 28 or lower, we haven't seen that yet. And given the outlook and the forecast, it's probably a good bet we won't see it for at least another week or two, and I'll talk more about that in a second. On our weather map this morning, though, it's high pressure off to our east here over Ontario, Quebec, and then down into the United States. That's the primary feature here. But there is also an upper air feature that you can't see on this is a surface map over the middle Mississippi Valley, and that's leading to some showers and some isolated thunder showers. You can see that in the radar pic down here in the lower left-hand side here. And while that does look from experience fairly ominous in terms of what it means for Michigan, in this case, because of dry air and a number of other factors, there's not a whole lot of instability here. This likely will not be an impact other than some clouds. And so today, both today and tomorrow, I think we'd have to call things, well, variably cloudy, but it will be fairly overcast at times. A few of some of the activity in that system to our south and west, and some of the moisture with that might get into western and northern parts of the state here later. And so we'll have to call this maybe a chance for an isolated shower or a thunder shower. For eastern parts of the state, I don't think we'll see anything. If this occurs again, it probably will be the western part of the state. Same is true tomorrow, no more than tops 20%. So most of the state will be dry. The other issue here is that it's significantly warmer than normal. And today, especially, we will see high temperatures once again from the upper 70s north into the low 80s south, which is considerably above typically where we are this time of the year. So warm and mostly dry. Same is true tomorrow, although as we move into the outlook here into the forecast, and tomorrow you can see basically not a whole lot of changes in the weather map. There's still some green off to our west, and that's probably where most of that is going to stay. A chance for an isolated shower, again, west and north, but most areas will remain dry and mild. A couple degrees probably cooler tomorrow than is the case today. And then on Saturday, again, more of the same. You can see a frontal boundary moving into northern parts of the state. That's relatively weak. There's very little moisture with it to work with. And so we may see a few scattered showers across upper Michigan during the day on Saturday. But other than that, most of the rest of the state remains dry. So for and you get the pattern here. You can hear this. We are looking at a mild and dry pattern here, extending probably into the middle of next week. So for most areas of the state, the next chance for anything significant or any precip probably not coming until the middle of next week, next Tuesday or possibly Wednesday. So another dry week. And again, the pattern, you can start to hear that this is because of the jet stream changes we've seen recently, and those are expected. That pattern is expected to continue. So again, in terms of maturation and dry down, it's probably a near optimal situation for most people getting these crops, at least trying to move them along if they haven't matured. But those that have, and it's coming along, we should see some fairly decent field dry down rates here over the next 1 to 2 weeks. Precipitation total or potential here over the next week. Once again, as you see, there's a lot of white on that map, indicating little or no precip expected through next Thursday. What is there? You can see in far western and southwestern portions of the state, that's what's expected. Well, if we get any precipitation today in these pop-up showers, it's going to be very, very light. So certainly less than 1/4 of an inch, in most cases, a lot less than that. What you see on the map here mostly is what is expected to come next week. Now, one other thing I would note on this map, if you look, you don't have to go very far into central and western portions of the Corn Belt, and the situation's very different. A lot of precipitation is expected here, and of course that area is really just moving into now some of the peak harvest, so that's going to cause problems for them, for areas to our west and to our south, but not here. Things are looking again pretty favorable here. Now in the medium range forecast term here, both 6 to 10, 8 to 14 day outlook. Look at this jet stream pattern, highly amplified, but you can see here a big ridge in the lower left-hand side here in the upper air across the Great Lakes. There's also a trough. It's a split flow with a subtropical or southern branch of the jet stream moving to our south, but Michigan's sort of in between. And as when we're there, it strongly suggests warmer than normal conditions would continue, and also drier than normal as well. We'll be getting some airflow actually out of the east and north from Canadian air masses, but for this time of the year, it'll be warmer than normal. Interesting, but definitely drier than normal. So both 6 to 10, 8 to 14 day outlooks are similar here in calling for warmer and drier than normal. Moving beyond that and thinking here, sort of looking at the where do we head for the next few months? Well, these are sea surface temperatures on the right-hand side here, the actual sea surface temperatures in the colors. And then I think the important one is down in the lower right. These are departures from normal, looking at the last 6 weeks or so and a time lapse of ocean. And this area here of orange and browns, this is really a large area of warmer than normal ocean water near the surface. And that is the hallmark signature of El Nino. Again, warmer than normal conditions there. And you can see it covers large areas of equatorial the equatorial Pacific region. And what happens ultimately in the atmosphere is all of this, it's extra energy for one. It leads to higher than normal global temperatures. That's because of the area included. But most importantly for us, it leads to changes in the flow of the jet stream across the Pacific, which ultimately impact us here in North America. And that's why it's used as a diagnostic in our long lead outlooks. And on the right-hand side, these are forecasts of El Nino conditions. It's called the El Nino Southern Oscillation Index. And when it is positive, warmer than normal, these are in temperature, the temperature in Celsius, it means that we have El Nino conditions at least over 1 degree Celsius or higher. And what we have now already is a moderate intensity El Nino. We may see there's a 50-50 chance it may become a strong. That's important because the stronger the El Nino event is, the more likely we are to see the anomalous conditions that statistically are typically associated with it. So right now it is looking, at least for the next several months, that this is the primary weather factor, certainly will be a primary factor in our forecast. And as we look ahead, go too far ahead here, we still see the same thing we saw in the medium range. Is it now? That's not coincidence, but it does suggest normal to above normal mean temperatures or warmer than normal conditions. This is for the October through December period, so looking at the next few months, and that basically continues. That's statistically what we see in most, not all, but most El Nino events is a milder and drier than normal winter. And if we move to all of the outlooks from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center and look here on the top row, these are the winter period. The one in the middle here is November through January. Upper right is December through February, so our classic 3-month winter period. You can see much of the northern U.S., including Michigan and the Great Lakes region, all suggested or to be milder than normal here for the upcoming winter. Similarly, a little bit less area in terms of precipitation, the same time frame, much of the upcoming winter drier than normal. And that, again, statistically, that's typically more often than not what we see with El Nino. And a couple of additional factors. What else do we know anything else? Well, one is we usually see, and this isn't a surprise given the mild and dry direction of our forecast, but this is snowfall anomalies for December, January, and February that are in El Nino winters. And for most, and again, not all, but most, we see below normal snowfall. The graphic on the left here is typically the direction. The browns here are all decreases from normal. And on the right-hand side here is the frequency with which that anomaly occurs. And again, you can see for much of the upper Midwest, it's certainly fairly common. It doesn't happen every time, but it's fairly common to see that less than normal snowfall. So that's a part of our outlook as well as we move into the next several months here. One last thing, can we say anything about crop yields around the world? Because El Nino and of course its other phase, La Nina, they do have global impacts. They certainly do have some impacts on crop yields. This is one for a graphic that's used quite often. It's a little bit dated now. It's about 10 years old, the study. But showing for 4 crops, what are impacts associated with El Nino events around the world. It turns out that there's probably a little bit more in the way of negative impacts on crop yields. For these 4 crops, it turns out globally, we typically, more often than not, we see small declines for corn, rice, and wheat, and maybe a little bit of a gain for soybeans. That's the bottom line from, at least from this research. But you can see there's some very, very major and notable differences regionally. One that shows up or stands out, I think, that isn't worth noting, because some areas have benefits, some areas have usually declines, but one that shows up with El Nino fairly frequently, and you can see that in the lower right-hand side here for wheat, it's wheat in Australia. And right now, of course, the crop there is vegetative and headed towards heading. So if they don't get rain during the September, October, November timeframe there with their crop, they have problems. And that's typically what we see again many times with El Nino events. That's one to look at in particular. South America, you can see, which has been in the news a lot with commodities recently. There are winners and losers both. It's a large area, and so we can't say much there with a direction or one or not. But note that there are some parts of the world, certainly. East Asia is another one that tends to see some negative impacts with El Nino that are worth looking at and spending a little time with, because it does translate into crop performance, can translate into crop performance as well. Well, with that, I'll wrap up here. And again, our outlook is, it's not a very exciting one, but it's certainly warmer than normal, and in most areas drier than normal, continuing here for much of the upcoming week. Few showers possible here and there, but most areas will see little or no precip. And in the medium range, similar direction, warmer and drier than normal, and even into the extended. We don't see that too often, where all of our outlooks are somewhat in agreement, but they are. It's a little coincidental here with the time frame. Most of our long lead outlooks, as we just mentioned here, are strongly based on the El Nino event in the Pacific, and will be for the next couple of months. So with that, I'll try and wrap things up and wish everyone best of luck here as we really move into the heart of harvest here. But hopefully the forecast will help a little bit here, and with mild and dry conditions, people can get some work done. That's certainly the hope. And so good luck with that.